Hello and welcome to the Journeymen podcast. I'm Joseph Corlett.
I'm Mark Reeves.
Join us as we travel from club to club, delving into the stories, tales and myths that help define the ethos and identities of football clubs all around the world.
We'll look at club history from all angles, whether it be a team's tactical style, superstitious fan rituals, or discussing the best players to grace the shirt.
From our base in Berlin, we aspire to give clubs of all sizes a platform to discuss their greatest triumphs and toughest heartbreaks.
We'll take you through fascinating untold stories with tales of heroes, villains, promotions, relegations, and everything in between.
We're back with part 2 of episode 9, covering none other than the mighty Newell's Old Boys, all the way down. They're based in Rosario of Argentina.
Good to be back. Yeah, we had a great response to the part 1. I think part 2, most of the people who were commenting, we had a lot of Leeds fans, and I think this is the part there especially we'll be looking forward to.
Early eras of Newell's Old Boys, we had the legend of Lito Gonzalez, who helped define the club and scoring many goals against Rosario Central, as well as also defining the club later, bringing them into professionalisation, as well as also winning their first ever national title. So make sure to go back and check that out if you haven't already. But apart from that, let's get into it, Mark.
We'll start this episode with a quote from Nicholas Blodge, who's a Rosario-based lawyer who's also a big fan but also Newell's historian. The quote is, "What we're most proud of and what makes us different is that our club was founded on the basic fundamentals of education and ethics, which are different values to other clubs in Argentina. Newell's is a way of life, it's a school for life, and there's a unique sense of belonging that players and the fans have with the club." And I think this is already a powerful quote, but especially as we've gone through the research through this episode, and you'll see what we mean as well.
We'll see it as we dive through this episode, but we're going to jump straight into their second ever National League title in the 87-88 season.
Yeah, and before winning this title, the Newell's had been runners-up in the 85-86 season and 86-87, and lost the final of the 85-86 pre-Libertadores League against Boca Juniors 4-1. But the second title, like Joey says, would come in 1988 after being crowned winners. And of course, you know, whenever you win a title, it's a great occasion, you know, any club would love that. But this is just on a whole new level. So imagine winning a title, but with homegrown players involved, but next level in terms of homegrown players involved.
I think every fan loves a homegrown player. And then maybe if you get a little crop of them, like Manchester United with the class of 92, Barcelona as well with that wave of La Masia talent. But Newell's Old Boys here set an absolutely pioneering achievement where they have a wave of homegrown talent like no one else.
For the new season, the club had appointed Jose Yaduca as coach, and himself being a former Newell's player, he started his career back in the 50s, 1954. And he added 3 new signings to his squad, which was Roque Alfaro, Victor Ramos and Sergio Almiron. These players were all signed, but all 3 of them were actually former Newell's youth players who had actually already started their careers at the club, just been brought back. And this resulted in a squad that was formed consisting only of footballers and coaching staff that had come through the youth levels at the club. The entire team, including the managerial team, is crazy.
This remains a unique event in Argentinian football, hell, in world football, and this historic title was sealed in the May of 1988 when Independiente visited Newell's Old Boys to face them at the Coloso del Parque. Meanwhile, San Lorenzo, Newell's only competition 3 points behind, faced River Plate.
Yeah, and just 7 minutes into the game, River Plate would score, so all eyes were now on Newell's. Could they out-achieve this result? And Newell's responded in emphatic fashion, hammering the Independiente 6-1, while River Plate would win 4-2 against San Lorenzo, who now had no chance of winning. So a second national title for Newell's, achieved using only 17 players throughout the season, and like I said, all of which trained at some kind of youth level at the club, at various academy levels, which is just incredible. And to me, as soon as I read this, it sounds like the most incredible football manager challenge. I think amazing. Like you say, like class of 92, and maybe the Celtic Lisbon Lions, but like, can we think of anything else that compares to that?
For example, with the Lisbon Lions, all but 2 members of the 15-man squad were born within 10 miles of Celtic Park in Glasgow. We did have a quick research, and there were some other mentions of like Steaua Bucharest when they won their European title. They were all Romanians. Meanwhile, just to reiterate again, this is Newell's Old Boys. Every player coming through the ranks at the club, absolutely insane. And it was such a surprise to discover this because, to be honest, we'd never heard of this achievement before jumping into this episode.
Absolutely incredible.
Habilitado Almirón frente a Isla. Gol, 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 gol. ¿Cómo amarra ese gol? Penal, penal, penal. Penal, penal, penal. No podía ser. El Yaya se acomoda. ¡Tira! Gol, gol, gol. Gol. Newell's Old Boys. Gol de Newell's, gol de Newell's. Vencido totalmente Irusta. vencido totalmente Irusta, que debutaba en esta jugada. El Yaya Rossi pone en ventaja Newell.
As we head into the 90s after this title, a familiar face is now going to pop up and take up quite a bit of our time, quite rightly, is Marcelo Bielsa, who, if you're aware of Bielsa, you'll know how much he loves like youth, bringing through the young players. So you can see already this must have been ingrained in him from this time. But at this point, yeah, Bielsa, who's a former Newell's player, and he'd began his career with the club back in the 70s. And he'd made his debut in 1976 against River Plate. Although he didn't have refined technique, he was known as a rock-solid and very temperamental defender. That doesn't sound like Bielsa, does it? Temperamental. And he was even a teammate of Jorge Valdano and Americano Gallego, among some other well-known players.
At the end of 1976, he was part of the Argentine national team that won bronze medal at the 1976 pre-Olympic tournament in Brazil. And our prior example of them winning the first national title together was already bonkers enough. And this national team that won the bronze medal has the peculiarity of being made up of footballers entirely from Newell's Old Boys again. So this identity of homegrown talent is just surely must be baked into Marcelo Bielsa.
When after we'd done this podcast, I don't think of like Newell's as having a stadium anymore. It's just like a factory conveyor belt of just like pre-packaged Argentinian players just like rolling out one after another.
Unfortunately, injury kept him out of the game for a long part of the season, forcing him to leave Newell's Old Boys in 1978. And he'd be transferred to Instituto de Cordoba, where with this team he'd be a starter for half the season, but then lost his position and unfortunately had his contract terminated, having only played 16 games.
And by 1979, he was signed by Argentino de Rosario, where he finished his career as a footballer in 1980. At this club, he actually scored his only official goal as a footballer. And during these last years as a player, Bielsa actually studied physical education teaching. Imagine Bielsa being like your PE teacher at school.
Oh, God.
Like sat on his bucket, like screaming at you.
This is where murder ball was. Kids running into one another.
What do you mean you forgot your kit?
Oh, God. Oh, no.
Yeah. But yeah, so he'd started studying physical education teaching. And in addition, he'd already started analysing videos of European league matches, which apparently an uncle of a friend of him used to send him from Spain.
After retiring from his playing career, he'd actually go on to open a newspaper and magazine kiosk in the city of Rosario. But Bielsa's first job as a coach would be for the University of the Buenos Aires team.
Yeah, the team was made up of students from the university who played sports as amateurs. And what I quite liked about this when it came up in the research is the parallels of how Newell's itself was originally founded, of the students coming through. And this ends up being Bielsa's first taste as coaching its students at the university. And yeah, he'd already begun sort of forging a reputation for himself, even at this level. And apparently a historic day for the university. His team actually managed to draw against the Boca Juniors reserve team. So Bielsa, even when he was a university PE teacher, is like sort of stirring things up and getting some results.
But Bielsa would soon resign from this position because of a call from none other than Newell's Old Boys.
And in 1982, he would begin work as a coach within the youth teams and academy setup of Newell's. And in true Bielsa eccentric style, he came up with a plan to divide the map of Argentina into 70 parts with 5 sections each, and with the intention of testing and trialling more than 1,000 young footballers, and then adding the most capable ones he found to his team. And apparently, just within 3 months of all these sections and trials he'd set up, he had travelled over 25,000 kilometres analysing players.
So just to put it into perspective, the circumference of the world is just over 40,000 kilometres. So Bielsa travelled literally halfway around the world.
Also, from the room that we're recording this podcast in now, in Berlin, to Argentina is 13,000 kilometres. So he basically just popped here and back.
From Berlin to Buenos Aires and all the way back. In 3 months, no less, as well.
Yeah.
In 3 months, he walked halfway around the world. And to be fair, that work ended up finding some utter gems. Rattle them off, Mark, because these are some incredible names that he managed to find.
Well, this is the thing, like, when I first read that, I'm like, I feel sorry if he's putting his petrol request in for every month of work. But yeah, in terms of getting an outcome from this, so at least 15 of these players were signed up, some of which later would become renowned footballers such as Mauricio Pochettino, Gabriel Batistuta, Eduardo Berizzo, or Ricardo Linari. Like, this is crazy. Like, and this was all, because you've got to imagine this is before the kind of elaborate scouting systems we have in the world now, and how easy it was to watch players. That he literally travelling around just doing these trials and signing up the best players, and those names there that were just read out is It's crazy.
It's no wonder that this is when this nickname, this fabled nickname that Marcelo cultivated of El Loco began to like take hold because of his unique training methods and also guessing scouting methods as well.
And by 1988, he'd won his first title, the Reserve Division Championship. And it should be noted, so how we started this episode with that incredible story of all of the youth teams and the players, it should be noted that in the same year, this is the year they were crowned the champion of the first division. The same year he wins his first youth title. And in that team was 17 academy players. And by this point, Bielsa had already been at the club since 1982. So you've got to think a lot of those players, those 17 academy players who had won the title in 1988, had come through, been trained by him, maybe even found by him in his 25,000 kilometre run. So what I love about that is already we're seeing Bielsa's coaching skills coming through, but also his eye for talent and youth development as well.
And it was only a year later, at the age of 33, he finally took up the first team job, for which he had been intensely preparing for over the previous years, as you could tell from the years and years of traversing and finding players and training players.
Apparently immediately brought up 10 reserve team players between the ages of 19 and 21 to the first team. And Newell's would actually be crowned winner of the Torneo Apertura 1990, and the team being characterised by its physical condition and pressure exerted on the opposition.
According to how the leagues worked at the time, this Newell's Old Boys team would face the winner of the Torneo Clausura in 1991 to determine who would be crowned the overall champion of the 1990-91 First Division Championship. So the title that Newell's Old Boys won would be disputed neck and neck with River Plate, and it was won on the last day against a match against San Lorenzo. That day would be remembered for the image of the celebration after that match, with Marcelo on the pitch, on the shoulders of the fans, with a Newell shirt in his hand, and he shouted the famous phrase, Newell's Carajo.
Oh, his exact shout was Newell's Carajo, Newell's Carajo, Carajo, Newell's, which English translations we've found from the newellscarajo.com website, solid source. The translation, 3 good English translations either come on the fucking Newells, come on to fuck Newells, or let's fucking go Newells. And this has become like a huge, and there's like graffiti still around Rosario with this on, like this is very iconic and always associated with Bielsa.
After this burst of emotion in which Bielsa would coin this famous phrase, this would lead them to playing none other than Boca Juniors to hopefully decide whether or not they would be the champion of the 1990-91 season.
And in the first leg in Rosario, Newell's Old Boys won through a header from Eduardo Berizzo. And in the return match, Newell's would lose 1-0, sending the tie to a penalty shootout, which Newell's would eventually win and achieve their third title. What an impact Bielsa's had already. You can argue he had a hand in that second one for the youth team and a direct hand in this third title.
He would continue to produce success with Newell's as they played in the 1992 Copa Libertadores. The Rosario team passed the first phase of the tournament, finishing top of their group, although the first game they received a heavy defeat against San Lorenzo, 6-0.
Yeah, and this humiliating result caused a lot of Newell's ultras to go to Bielsa's house and threaten him. Apparently, so the legend goes, that Bielsa opened the door with a grenade in his hand and said, either you leave or I throw it.
The story continues saying that when the supporters did eventually back away and start to flee, Bielsa wasn't done with there. He began to chase them down the street in his pyjamas, shouting, "Do you still want to talk? Do you still want to talk?"
This is when we go back to that vision of him being your PE teacher. I forgot my shorts. Right. A grenade in the top drawer of his desk. Yeah, El Loco, like, of course. Yeah, and I just love the image of him in his pyjamas as well. And I think it's especially funny because of course, my main thought of him is like in a Leeds point of view. I'm just imagining him like running around Weatherby, like in his pyjamas with a grenade in his hand or something.
I just hope they were black and red pyjamas. That's all I hope.
Black and red grenade.
Yeah.
But yeah, finally Newell's passed this elimination section to put themselves in the final against Sao Paulo of Brazil. And in the first leg, Newell's won 1-0 with a goal from Berizzo, while in the return leg, the Brazilians tied the game again, and it once again would go to a penalty shootout, but this time Sao Paulo would be champions 3-2 in the penalty shootout.
But just weeks later, Bielsa's team would again be crowned champions of the 1992 Clausura tournament part of the season, giving Newell's their 4th star. That team was characterised by its effective defence and offensive split, a trademark of Bielsa's teams. The 10 outfield players attacked, and then when they lost the ball, all 11 would also defend. Bielsa continued to opt for younger players who he'd already trained at the youth levels at the club, such as Mauricio Pochettino and many others. Other starting players would already established at Newell's before his arrival, such as Gerardo Martino and goalkeeper Norberto Scoponi, who were also champions in 1988.
And I think that brings us to a good point of like, now we've seen Bielsa's sort of managerial coaching, scouting style develop, to now watch him leave Newell's and go abroad for the first time. And see how he does there, because a lot of the things that are so sort of iconic at Newell's and part of like this way of like the identity, the youth system, you'll see how he then applies that to other clubs he goes to.
So after what seems like great success at Newell's Old Boys, you'd maybe expect a man of this stature to, jump across to Europe straight away, or that's what you'd expect in the modern era. But Bielsa maybe took a bit more of an unfamiliar path, where he went to Mexico and first managed Atlas Guadalajara.
I think made me laugh, because once again we can relate it to recent events when Bielsa, about a year or so ago, was offered the Everton job, and it was a very funny thing at the time that apparently he told the Everton board he would manage the youth team until the end of the season and then maybe take over the first team. Well, that's basically what he did at Atlas Guadalajara. And during his first year at the club, he spent all of his time actually working on the team's youth academy, just how he'd done in Rosario. More than 11,000 young players were tested once again. He once again found some gems, such as Rafa Marquez, Juan Pablo Rodriguez, Jared Borghetti and Pavel Pardo. And during one season, practically half of the Mexican national team was made up of players developed by Bielsa, who was one of the people who transformed how you work with young players. But like I say, it wasn't until the 93-94 season that then he would actually then take charge of the first team after doing all this work.
When we were laughing at the idea of him coming to Everton and taking over the youth team whilst they were in the middle of a relegation battle, from the outside it did sound quite bizarre, but now all of a sudden it does seem to make a lot more sense, to be fair. And when you've pulled up these type of gems who would then go on to be absolute stars of the Mexican national team for years and years and years, you can't really say anything. You can't say it didn't work, put it that way.
And by 1996, he actually would take the Club America job in Mexico, where he would only manage actually 33 games but would qualify for the playoffs. And off the back of all this work he'd done for basically finding and producing new young Mexican players, he was offered the role apparently of the Mexican national team, but an offer he declined, and instead he would return to Argentina and would lead Vélez Sarsfield to a league title.
Despite the success, he decided to leave Vélez for various reasons. There was talk about the relationship between the coach and some of the players, especially Jose Luis Chilavert, who is the commonly known free kick penalty scoring ace. But the main cause was kind of the physical and psychological exhaustion of team from Bielsa's style, which is something that would kind of become a bit of a trope that followed Bielsa wherever he went in the future too.
A short spell at Espanyol would follow before he got the big job. I think you'd imagine at this point the one he must have been waiting out for when he rejected the Mexico job was the Argentinian national football team job. And it completely makes sense why, like, just from this bit of research, even if you didn't know anything about Bielsa, somebody who maybe unearthing a couple of players and them going on to do something, maybe you could say you got lucky. But when you have just constantly produced and nurtured young footballers, it's clearly a great option, you would think.
It's just strange that he didn't take over like the U23 Argentinian national team first for like 4 years.
And manage the under-12s first.
At the 1999 Copa America, Argentina would be beaten 3-0 by Colombia in a game where Argentinian forward Martin Palermo missed 3 penalties, in which also Bielsa would be sent off. During Bielsa's post-match reaction, Tim Vickery of the BBC wrote, "In the press conference, he sat staring into space, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. He was asked what he made of the referee's performance. If the question was predictable, the answer was anything but. Bielsa answered, 'One doesn't usually have the habit of commenting on referees, but.' This led everyone believing he would continue with a normal rant about a joker running amok with the whistle. Instead, he turned around and proceeded with, 'But in respect to my expulsion, the referee was absolutely correct because I protested in an ill-mannered form.'"
It's like, even when you think he's predictably chaotic, you still can't predict it. Because then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, no, they did do that wrong.
To be fair, maybe he realised they'd been awarded 3 penalties.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, yeah, if you're going to have a go at a referee, you probably can't do it in a game where he's given you 3 penalties. Poor Martin Palermo. Imagine the telling off Martin Palermo got in the corner, missing all 3 penalties.
He arrived back in the dressing room, sweat pouring down his shirt, disappointed with his performance, and then he opens up his little boot bag and there's a grenade in there.
Oh man, on. But yeah, Argentina would win the qualification group for the 2002 World Cup, but didn't get through the first knockout round at the tournament. Despite this, though, Bielsa would stay on in his position as the manager. They would be runners-up in the 2004 Copa America and would win the 2004 Olympic Games gold medal. With the latter, his team actually became the first Latin American team to win the Olympic title in football since 1928, when actually Uruguay beat Argentina in the final. So the first Argentinian Olympic gold medal in 52 years. Despite this, Bielsa would resign at the end of 2004 after the Olympics.
Next up for Marcelo would be the Chilean national team. By helping Chile qualify for the World Cup after 2 tournament absences, Bielsa attained almost a godlike status there. His appointment brought about visible changes in the Chilean setup, with fast-tracking of young talents and a more attacking mindset away from home.
Due to the rumours that Bielsa would not continue to lead Chile after finishing their campaign at the World Cup, Chilean fans campaigned for him to remain as coach with a movement titled Bielsa is not leaving. Chile would reach the round of 16 of the World Cup, where they were eliminated by Brazil. In 2010, the president of the Chilean Football Board announced that Bielsa would remain with the Chilean team until 2015. But Bielsa actually stated that he would leave his position if Jorge Segovia wasn't elected as the new president of the football board. And he actually followed through on this threat. And despite this election being annulled, he resigned in February 2011. You can call him many things, but he's a man of his word. But I think it was very ambitious from the head of the Chilean football board to say, like, no, he will be here for another 5 years. Bielsa's never spent that amount of time at any club.
And following on in this kind of form, short spells would follow at Athletic Bilbao and at Marseille, but an even shorter spell at Lazio would make big headlines.
This is pretty box office Bielsa, isn't it? July 2016, as Joey alludes to, Bielsa was appointed manager of Lazio in Serie A in Italy. However, on just 2 days later, Bielsa quit, prompting Lazio to issue legal action against him for a breach of contract and suing him for €50 million. He later explained that the club had been unable to recruit the players he had wanted by the deadline he had given to the club and did not feel his needs would be supported during the transfer window.
Bielsa later stated it was agreed as an essential condition to the implementation of the work programme that we would sign at least 4 footballers before July the 5th, with the aim that they would participate in pre-season training. To this date, not one player has been signed.
The most important reason for this, as he also says, is for my method of working, we need to have these players arrive in a timely manner to train for pre-season. So the worst thing you can be to Bielsa is not fit enough for his system. I think he would happily take someone who's a far lesser footballer, but the fitness is there. And clearly, despite it only being 2 days after, I'm guessing, because there'd been a lot of players had left Lazio that summer, and I think even before he'd signed the contract, I think there was some agreement that by this date players would arrive. They hadn't, and so he went.
Again, you can't say he's not a man of his word. He clearly must have asked for these players. He didn't get it, and he left. So you got to respect that in a certain sense. Again, however, another turbulent spell at Lille came next. After moving on the majority of the older players at the club to focus on the young talents, just like in that classic Marcelo style, Bielsa would actually be suspended as coach after just 13 games in charge, with Lille announcing he'd been suspended momentarily as coach, pending further announcement.
And this was motivated by the fact he made a trip to Chile without authorisation. So on top of they'd had some bad results, things wasn't working out, but he'd gone to Chile without their permission due to one of his former assistants, Luis Maria Bonini, who was sick with cancer. So he flew back to see him, and that also didn't go down too well with the club. And by December, the club announced that the contractual relationship had ended due to serious misconduct, poor results and differences within the management.
Yeah, I mean, not to defend Bielsa all the time here. He seems a certain way of working, and if it doesn't work, it's probably not going to work. But to fly back and visit a former assistant who is unfortunately suffering cancer doesn't seem like the most... he's not going back and partying all night, is he? He's not...
The thing, you can see the pattern develop. He's clearly a fantastic coach and brilliant at developing players. But it's never for the long term. It's always very...
It has to be a very specific set of circumstances.
Yeah, and then he will excel. But even then... But by this point, after some time out of the game, Bielsa would be appointed to a lot of fanfare, I remember at the time, as the new Leeds United manager in June 2018.
Coming into this part of Marcelo's career, this will probably be the part that most of us are all most familiar with. However, before this point, he hadn't really touched base with England or the Premier League or the Championship of any sort. So before then, it was a little bit of mystique about what this sort of mad, some of these stories about the grenade and stuff have come across, but what can this Argentinian maverick do for Leeds United that many other managers had failed to do before that point?
Yeah, and we were talking about actually this when we were thinking back. We were at uni at the time. One of our close friends was a Leeds United fan. I remember saying to him at the time, like, you are either going to demolish this league or you are going to get relegated, and it will be utter carnage. And I was like, I feel like there isn't much room of a grey area.
However, Marcelo definitely went with the we're going to destroy the league when he won his first 4 games in charge and becoming the first manager in Leeds United history to do so.
But I think the thing that really sort of put him on everybody's radar, like proper box office, was in 2019, the event that we all know pretty well now, Spygate, which absolutely gripped the press.
Before a 2-0 victory over Derby County in the January of 2019, which increased Leeds' lead at the top of the table, in the match build-up, Bielsa admitted he had sent a spy to the Derby training ground after reports emerged that a man was spotted the previous day outside of Derby County's training ground.
So it actually emerged that this man who had been acting suspiciously was an employee of Leeds United. And there's an incredible tweet from the police in Derbyshire where they actually posted a picture of a man sat in the back of a police van. Officers have just attended the training ground for Derby County after a suspicious male was seen at the perimeter fence. Search was conducted and male was located. All checks above board, keeping the team safe to bring home a win against Leeds United on the 11th. Hashtag spying is cheating. And this is the official police account. But I think the thing that's even funnier are the Leeds United fans in reply to this. We use drones. We're Leeds United, we use drones. Another guy, all spies, aren't we?
Obviously, then Derby County came out with an official statement saying it has been confirmed that the individual concerned is an employee of footballing staff at Leeds United Football Club. The club is now in discussion with Leeds United. And it's also said that Lampard had recalled seeing someone hanging around the training ground before the reverse fixture 5 months earlier in the season. So for Frank Lampard to then come out and be critical, in inverted commas, of Bielsa's methods, well, come on, Frank, if you can't recognise the same guy, it's kind of your own fault, to be honest.
Lampard said, on a sportsmanship level, it's bad. But if we're going to talk about culturally and say I did it somewhere else and it's fine, I don't believe that either. It's disrupted our build-up and people say I'm making an excuse, but I'll speak like this after the game whether we win, lose or draw. At
this point, one of Marcelo Bielsa's young youth academy projects had actually blossomed into his own burgeoning managerial career, which was Mauricio Pochettino at Tottenham Hotspur. And he described the incident as, in simple terms, not a big deal, and it's commonplace in Argentina.
Guardiola also, when asked about Bielsa's scouting methods, I mean, this is the most Guardiola answer ever. I think it made my skin crawl just hearing it because I could just hear him saying it. So he was asked about these scouting methods and Guardiola replied, describing him as the best, and said everybody who works for them is a better player and the teams are better. That's why he's a special manager and a special person.
We cannot replace him.
We cannot.
He has the best scouting method. I cannot walk 25,000 kilometers. No one can do that.
And afterwards, the EFL would actually announce that they are investigating, and with intense media scrutiny. It got really big at the time, didn't it? It got really big. This is when the Spygate name was born. Bielsa announced the now infamous press conference where he gave analysis of his research, detailing his meticulousness, thoroughness and preparation over his opponents, with some journalists describing it as a coaching masterclass and genius. If you've never seen this, it must be on YouTube. Find it and watch it on YouTube, because I remember at the time, usually all of the very gobby journalists who you can never shut up, everybody just sat mouth up, no idea what was going on.
Basically, Bielsa was like, well, if I've been caught, then I might as well
tell you everything.
Yeah. And by everything, this was a PowerPoint that was the size of the entire wall. Every cell of this spreadsheet was filled with numbers and players and results, and he just spent 45 minutes just breaking it down for these journalists who just got basically the lowdown on what Frank Lampard's Derby County team were all about, really.
I don't need to go to watch the training session of an opponent
para interpretarlo.
To know how the opponent plays.
¿Por qué voy?
Why do I go?
Porque no está prohibido.
Because it's not forbidden.
Porque no sabía que iba a generar semejante rechazo.
I didn't know I would have such a reaction, and because even though this going and watching an opponent is not useful,
me tranquiliza hacerlo.
It allows me to keep my anxiety low.
This now legendary Spygate saga would eventually be resolved about a month later, when Leeds would be fined £200,000 by the EFL for breach of a portion of a rule, 3.4 of the EFL regulations, in quotes, In all matters of transactions relating to the league, each club shall behave towards each other and the league in the utmost good faith, with the EFL announcing a new rule that teams would not watch opposition training up to 72 hours before a game. So
I completely get the quote I read out from Lampard. I completely get, because it's unheard of in this country. The EFL actually had to add a new rule to make sure no one would now do it anymore, because it actually wasn't in the rules. It was a grey area. And like you say, he was always trying to find these percentages. I think one of my favourite story for him in Leeds is the story of Leeds training ground, which is in near Wetherby.
Thorpe Arch.
And have you ever seen the Bielsa line?
No.
And it's because he lived pretty close, and the whole thing was he used to live close to training ground so he could just walk there, because he never wanted to why would you waste time walking to the training ground actually looking where he was going? And he got the club to paint a line on the floor, so then he can be looking through his tactics and notes and stuff, and he never has to look up. He just, as long as he sees a line going, he just follows the line.
Hey,
it's still there.
It's a commute. If it's a 15 minutes commute, that's another 15 minutes dedicated to finding what the XG of Frank Lampard's Derby County team is all about, So those 15 minutes could be valuable. But my God, that's the next level, isn't it?
I think it should be protected by Heritage England. The line literally goes from Bielsa's front door flat in Wetherby to Thorpe Arch.
And just to go above and beyond, it was then later revealed that Bielsa would pay this fine, this £200,000 fine, out of his own pocket. So at the end of the day, it kind of feels like he pushed the barriers, he did what he needed to do to try and win. He did mess up, or broke the rules in England anyway, or in the EFL, and then he was like, hands up, fair enough, and paid it out of his own pocket. Who could say a bad word about that? Who?
I think following on from that, and also, it could be easily forgotten it, we're still in Bielsa's first season at Leeds, right? And after all of that stuff we've just spoken about, I think that's still not the most dramatic moment of the season. It's just how mad this was. So yeah, there was another big dramatic moment to come. And that was in April 2019. So I think just as Spygate had all settled down and gone away, Bielsa made one of the most, I think, contentious managerial calls of not even just that championship season, probably in English football for a long time, in Leeds' penultimate league game against Aston Villa at Ellen Road.
In the 72nd minute of a tight game between both teams who had been jostling in the playoff promotions, a bite with Leeds still mathematically able to gain automatic promotion, Aston Villa's Jonathan Kodjia was injured and remained down on the ground. Meanwhile, Tyler Roberts kind of passed the ball up towards the Aston Villa end of the pitch in a kind of slow style, but that didn't stop Mateusz Klich from latching onto the ball, dancing in off the left wing and slotting the ball into the corner past Jed Steer. The goal, the first of the game, sparked pandemonium all around the stadium. Clearly the Aston Villa players had thought that Leeds United were trying to kick the ball out of play or return the ball back to them on behalf of the injured Aston Villa player. Aston Villa's Conor Hourihane, Ahmed Al-Mohammadi and Neil Taylor, plus Leeds United's Patrick Bamford, were then all caught up in basically a big old tussle with Klich at the centre of this, which involved additional players from both sides, the managers, the fans in the stand were all shouting for their team, and basically Ellen Road erupted into this absolute state of just anger and bemusement at basically Leeds United scoring kind of a legitimate goal, but basically not the most sportsmanly goal.
Kodjia down. No recognised striker on the bench. Well, again, I think will Leeds put it out? Oh, this is controversial. Klich goes on and scores, and Villa will be fuming.
Even the stewards and everything were coming on and breaking it up. It was crazy. And in the immediate aftermath, the referee sent off Anwar El Ghazi with a straight red card. Bielsa's response to his players was, in the interest of fairness and after consulting with Villa boss Dean Smith, that his team should allow an unchallenged equaliser to be scored. And Bielsa can actually be seen shouting, give the goal, from the touchline. And from the restart, Albert Adoma basically walks the ball into the net unchallenged by 10 Leeds players. And what I love as well, because I would 100% be Pontus Jansson in this situation. Pontus Jansson's the only player who is in sheer disbelief, who's chasing after Albert Adoma and nearly dispossesses him. So the game remained 1-1 and put the second automatic promotion spot mathematically out of reach for Leeds and saw them enter the playoffs. So it's a crazy thing to do anyway, but in this game and at this point in the season, they sacrificed an automatic promotion spot and dropped into the playoffs.
Well, Marcelo Bielsa is indicating to me that is what he wants. Now, can't be 100% certain, but that's what it looks like he wants. He's pointing at his defenders, I have to say, looks to me like he's just shouted, give the goal. So we'll see what happens here. And Adoma is going to go on. Janssen hasn't got the memo, but Adoma will put it in, and we're back where we started. This is absolutely extraordinary.
I've never seen anything like it in all my years. I haven't. Janssen.
Which, when you think of the kind of stereotypes that follow Leeds around of like not being the most popular team or being maybe a bit of an unsportsmanly team back in the 80s, back in the 70s, if anything, this was a remarkable turn of stereotype, a remarkable turn of character for Bielsa to demand that Leeds let Aston Villa score another goal, and in the end sacrificing their own promotion bid is it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I don't know how Leeds fans felt, because they would actually in the end finish third and were knocked out of the playoffs by Frank Lampard's Derby County as revenge for Spygate. But maybe it made them feel a bit better that Bielsa and his team were awarded the 2019 FIFA Fair Play Award for their actions, with FIFA saying the game finished 1-1, ultimately allowing their promotion rival Sheffield United to guarantee their automatic spot in the Premier League at Leeds' expense. What was at stake makes Bielsa's act of sportsmanship all the more remarkable. It's absolutely mad, isn't it?
So despite this remarkable act of sportsmanship, which would end up with Leeds not getting promoted, in the second time of asking in his second season, they would secure promotion. After West Brom lost to Huddersfield, this meant that Leeds were finally back in the promised land of the Premier League after 16 long seasons.
The day after, Brentford's loss to Stoke meant that Leeds were crowned the Championship champions for the fourth time in their history with 2 games to play. And in honour of his achievements at the English club, the city named one of the streets after him. And yeah, I think by this point as well, what we've not mentioned yet is actually, because there's so many crazy off-field things, is what Bielsa had been doing on the pitch at Leeds as well, of basically turning them into this freakish like fitness monster of a team, but also like how he was developing the young players there, and also some players who, you know, maybe being like EFL sort of journeyman kind of players who all of a sudden were like looking fantastic basically. And he would carry this momentum on into his third season, Leeds' first season back in the Premier League.
With Leeds United, he achieved a very credible 9th place, and they secured more points and scored more goals than any other promoted side had for 20 years.
Watching Leeds that season, if you were a neutral, was great. It was completely mad, like the amount of goals you would see for both teams, just end-to-end crazy football.
And whilst this messiah of a manager had taken Leeds back to the top of the pyramid, he was still developing new methods, new training methods in this El Loco style that we seem to love him as. For example, one of these methods that came to rise in England was the term murder ball, which Leeds striker Patrick Bamford described as, it's 11v11 on a full-size pitch, and every player has his own cone. As soon as the ball goes out of play, wherever you are on the pitch, you have to sprint back to your cone, and the ball is chucked back onto the pitch somewhere, and you go again. It's constant sprinting. It's man-to-man. If your man runs, you be running with him. And I remember also the idea that it was like there was no fouls. I'm guessing they weren't kicking lumps out of each other, but probably throwing in some heavy tackles, and it's just constant intensity, just like Marcelo has done everywhere else in his career, to be fair.
And that was the big thing his team would do in that first Premier League season when they did so well, was that they were so much fitter than every other team in the league. And that's how the amount of late goals they scored, I can't remember the exact number, but a Premier League game would get to 75 minutes onwards and Leeds could just keep running. They would literally run around you to score. But unfortunately, the following season, I think once people start getting wise to how you play and things like that, and maybe even a bit of, I know it became a bit of a stereotype in the end, this whole Bielsa burnout kind of thing. But yeah, by the second season, he'd only collected 23 points in 26 games, although they were enough to avoid falling into the relegation zone. But in February 2022, he was fired after 5 consecutive games without a win, with 4 of those being consecutive losses.
We remember from the time that that decision was not a popular decision, or it wasn't one that the club really wanted to take. And because of this, his legacy still at Leeds United is incredibly strong. As we mentioned in the first part of the episode, it's led to a kind of unofficial friendship between Leeds United and Newell's Old Boys, as many Leeds United fans have made the pilgrimage to Rosario to watch Newell's Old Boys and do some ground hopping in Rosario in Argentina. And the style of football combined with his strong principles have just made him a fan favourite probably forever, to be honest.
I think a great sort of quote to end that Bielsa sort of focus is a quote from Bielsa himself: "A man with new ideas is a madman until his ideas triumph," which I think is great, because we have seen him genius, madman, everything in those bits that we've gone through.
I feel you could just add, and it helps if I have a grenade in my hand. People understand my ideas when I threaten them with a grenade.
Lampard should have been glad they weren't lobbing grenades over the fence in the training ground. If we go back to Newell, so basically over the course of basically what we've just gone through there of Bielsa jetting around all these things, Newell's really in the following years were far from the fight of any championship really. The closest they came again was actually in 1994, third in 1997, but it wouldn't be until 2004 that Newell's would actually win their fifth league title. And to achieve this, Newell's had a coach, Americo Gallego, who put together a team with young players backed with a backbone of experienced players.
Newell's became the first team from the province of Santa Fe to win a national title during the 21st century. But it was around the same time a former Newell's youth prospect had started making a name for himself in Europe. So at this point, it's kind of hard to not really mention him anymore.
The elephant in the room now. And also probably the only time on the Journeymen we'll ever be able to speak about Lionel Messi.
A lifelong supporter of Newell's Old Boys, Messi joined the Rosario club when he was just 6 years old.
During the 6 years that he played for Newell's youth teams, he scored almost 500 goals as a member of the Machine of 87, the near unbeatable youth side named for the year of their birth, and regularly entertained crowds by performing ball tricks during half-time at the first team's home games.
I think when you're scoring that many goals, word began to spread around Rosario about this mythical kid, Messi. Newell's fans began to attend academy games, watching this future homegrown players, and began to just go there just to watch Messi. They would sit alongside the family members of Messi's teammates and cheer proudly. There was no doubting Messi's incredible skill. But, however, his compact build and his skinny legs did temper expectations about what he could achieve.
People were astonished by his skills, but he was very little, he was tiny. And his Newell's teammates remember him as an absolute killer. He would win games for them and titles at this sort of level. But his exploits ended there. They didn't go beyond Rosario. In these youth divisions, they always had one phenomenon, but nobody knew how good he was actually going to be. You know, he was 11, 12 years old by this point. And as a result of the breakout at such a young age, he never actually played professionally for Newell's.
However, his future as a professional player was threatened when, at this young age, he was diagnosed with a growth hormone deficiency. At the time, his father's health insurance only managed to cover 2 years' worth of therapy for this condition, which would cost at least $1,000 per month. Newell's agreed to contribute, but would later U-turn on their promise.
He was scouted by Buenos Aires club River Plate, whose playmaker Pablo Aimar he idolised. It was speculated that he failed to be signed by River Plate due to his ill health. However, in a 2019 interview, Messi revealed that the club had offered to pay for his medical treatment, despite actually rejecting him anyway. And as the Messi family had relatives in Catalonia, they sought to arrange a trial with Barcelona in September 2000.
Barcelona's first team director immediately wanted to sign him, but the board of directors hesitated. At the time, it was highly unusual for European clubs to sign foreign players at such a young age. In December, an ultimatum would be issued to Barcelona to prove if they were committed to signing this young Argentinian. And ultimately, this first team director bent to the will of this ultimatum and with no paper on hand, offered a contract simply scribbled on a paper napkin, as the story goes. In the February of 2001, his family would relocate to Barcelona, where they moved into an apartment near the club stadium.
The agent that actually brokered the deal with Barcelona said, I thought I had been duped. I thought to myself, this small child can't play football. He's tiny. His leg looked like a finger. They are going to break this kid's legs.
During his first year in Spain, Messi rarely played with the team due to the transfer conflict with Newell's, and as a foreigner, he could only be fielded in friendlies and in the Catalonian local league. Without football, he struggled to integrate into the team. Already reserved by nature, he was so quiet that his teammates initially believed he was mute. In Catalonia, he suffered from homesickness after his mother moved back to Rosario with his brothers and little sister, whilst he tried his best to stay in Barcelona with his father.
And we all sort of know what happened next on his journey. The rest is history. We don't need to go into that. But after becoming arguably the greatest player of all time, what's quite nice is Messi always kept Newell's in his heart, you know. We found some great quotes of, for Newell's supporters, their connection to Messi, it's more of like a long-distance relationship. A childhood sweetheart who ended up with someone else far away. But they have, they've watched him go on, and of course Messi's loved in Argentina anyway, but think Think of it for Newell's fans. Think how proud they are. Like the other quote said, he was a complete unknown. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Nobody knew he was going to be the best player in the world. But yeah, after that, Newell's fans have always been very proud of Messi, and we feel like he's one of our own, and we always protect our own.
Again, it's one of those many questions that we stumble upon when we record these podcasts, though. It's just, what if Newell's had stumped up the money for his growth therapy? What career could he have had? I mean, he probably would have gone on to be an amazing player. It's just insane or impossible to think of, really, like what path he would have taken. Because maybe he might have ended up at Barcelona. Many of the best players in the world do end up there anyway. Could have been ended up at Real Madrid or the heights of the Premier League, or to be a bit of a downer, he could have been chopped down in some game for Newell's first team and been injured and never make it, to be fair, as well. So big what if, and maybe a shame for Newell's old boys, but then maybe it's probably for the best for him to go to Barcelona and get that treatment and be in probably one of the best youth academies in the world and blossom into what has become this icon, this hero, arguably the best player in the world. He will always be Newell's, and the fans will always, as Mark already said, to quote, we will always protect our own.
Very poetically, Messi would grace the pitch at the Estadio Marcelo Bielsa for Maxi Rodriguez's testimonial game. And this actually marked Messi's first time at Newell's in 14 years, coincidentally marking his 36th birthday in a very unique way. And it took him just 4 minutes to score the first goal of the match before he actually ended up scoring a hat-trick, as the 42,000 fans lucky enough to be in attendance wished him happy birthday from the stands. But I think our favourite image, once we were going through all of this, is the image of Messi, his homage to Diego Maradona after Maradona died.
After scoring against Osasuna for Barcelona, Messi would peel off his number 10 Barcelona shirt and reveal underneath a Newell's Old Boys number 10 shirt underneath, which had actually been previously worn by Maradona himself. It wasn't just a replica, it wasn't just a random shirt, it was a match-worn Diego Maradona Newell's Old Boys shirt. Absolutely incredible.
This is amazing, because obviously I knew the picture, but I never knew, I had a newfound respect for it when I knew, and also imagine how much that shirt is worth. It's been worn in a game by Maradona and Messi, which is just ridiculous. And the story goes that this shirt was in the possession of Sergio Fernandez, a shirt collector, and he knew of Messi's Newell's connection. He wanted to gift him the shirt. And apparently on several occasions over the years, he tried to get the shirt to him, but just couldn't get close enough. But managed to finally get it to him during the 2018 World Cup, and since then it had a place in Messi's personal museum. But however, Fernandez had no idea that the shirt would actually go on to be worn by Messi to pay homage to Maradona after his death, which is, is amazing.
Messi al arco, golazo. Golazo del Barça, del rey del fútbol mundial, de Leo, de Messi. Lo estamos esperando, señores, para despejar todo tipo de dudas. Lo hace Messi. El cuarto en la liga lo hace Leo, 28 minutos, Barcelona 4, ahora sí, Osasuna 0, lo hizo Messi. Señoras y señores, y el homenaje de Leo para Diego Armando Maradona. Estamos esperando este gol. Muy bien, Leo, muy bien, con la 10, con la de Newell. El recuerdo de Messi a Maradona. Muy bien, Leo, muy bien. Señores, golazo de Messi, 4-0.
Whilst we've talked about one of the best Argentinian players ever, we then get to jump into arguably one of the best ever Argentinian players again. While we're on the topic of Messi, we get to be able to dive into none other than Maradona as well, as it's worth reiterating that two of the greatest players of all time have a great connection to Newell's. However, unlike Messi, Maradona's connection would come a bit later in his career.
And after failing a drugs test that had found cocaine in his system, he was handed a 15-month ban while at Napoli. He would land at Sevilla but wouldn't settle there, and that's where his homeland of Argentina began to sort of beckon towards the end of his career to come back.
In 1993, negotiations were actually on track for him to return to his former youth team, Argentinos Juniors, until a threatening demand from the club's Barra Bravas, or their supporter groups, demanded a delivery or a ransom of some sort of $50,000. We're not really sure what that meant in terms of either Maradona had to cough this up or the club did, but anyway, regardless, it destroyed the deal and led the pathway for Maradona returning to Argentine football with Newell's Old Boys.
In a bid to set expectations, he stated, "I'm going to be more realistic than ever. I don't want to fool people upon joining." And reportedly, a crowd of fans chanting Maradona's name met him at the Rosario airport before he was transported to the training ground where 40,000 people gathered to watch his first session in the middle of a party that had been organised by the coach Jorge Raul Solari. He would make his debut for the club against Independiente, showing all class and insane dribbling technique that you would expect.
Unfortunately, he couldn't do much about the result as Newell slumped to a 3-1 defeat with some wild goalkeeping on the second Independiente goal, which you could hardly say was anything to do with Diego. But his silky final passes and his movement was just a beautiful sight to be seen. You could see instantly he was playing at a level way beyond most of his teammates, and even attempting to beat the goalkeeper at his near post with a Raboned finish late on, which was just, peak class Maradona.
But sadly, during a match against Huracan, he suffered a muscle tear that kept him out of action for many weeks. And by the time he recovered, club manager had left and he'd been replaced by Jorge Castelli.
He wasn't so comfortable with Diego taking leaves of absence. This was one of the reasons that ended up with the departure of Maradona from Rosario, with his final match being a friendly against Vasco da Gama in 1994.
He would only actually play 5 official matches in the end for Newell's. Despite this short time at the club, this didn't stop Newell's fans from celebrating his return as manager of Gimnasia quite a few years later. Gimnasia would be the last club of his ill-fated managerial career, which had seen him take charge of Deportivo Mandieu and Racing Club in the 90s before a 13-year break saw him return to the dugout with the Argentinian national team.
He would then follow that up with UAE side Al Wasal, just as an assistant at Deportivo Restreya back in his homeland, before then jetting off back to the United Arab Emirates with Faraya, before jetting off to Mexico with, and we're not making this up, he would become the manager of Dorados de Sinaloa.
We all know what they produce, Sinaloa.
Thankfully, probably for the best, he only managed a year in Mexico, and this is where Gimnasia come into the picture. They have the nickname El Lobo, or the Wolf, and then also Los Triperos, meaning the gut handlers, which may sound kind of violent on first inspection, but actually comes historically from many of their fans working in the meat industry in the local area. So yeah, at first you're a bit like, the gut handlers, how violent are these fans going to be? But then yeah, when you kind of think, they're in the meat industry, all of a sudden it's okay. During Diego's return as a manager with Gimnasia to Newell's, he was serenaded as soon as he arrived at his hotel with thousands of fans outside. Many videos of him dancing and singing along on the balcony up above these fans, shimmying and throwing up his arms, waving around a Newell scarf and everything. It's just a spectacular sight to see, and something that we always like to try and put these situations into maybe an English context or into a context that we could imagine. And it's one of those things you just can't really replicate anywhere else outside of Argentina, really, can you?
Yeah, I can't imagine.
It's like Chelsea fans going to serenade Jose Mourinho when he returned as Man United manager or something like that.
No, but it's like a legend playing for your club, but only for a short amount of John Terry for Aston Villa or something.
Yeah, that's another angle we didn't even think of. It was only 5 games, was it? So it's even more insane. But again, he is a legend of Newell's. He's also a legend of Argentina as well. And I'd imagine having such a star-studded name coming into your town.
Can I just stress I wasn't comparing John Terry to Maradona there. I just suddenly was thinking, man, I'm like, someone will call me out on that. I want to stress that wasn't what I meant.
However, at the time, Gimnasia had slumped down the table, and this is why they had looked upon this messiah to turn around their fortunes. And they'd only won once in their previous 9 games leading up to this tie against Newell's Old Boys. On the match day, he would be greeted with his very own red and black throne, which he would be signed, surrounded by photographers, and it would be sit there pitch side before guiding his Gimnasia side to a 4-0 win over then title chasing Newell's Old Boys.
The throne is incredible. It is incredible.
It was also be noted that on TNT Sports there was a live action cam that would just be pointed on
Maradona
Diego
cam.
sat in his throne as well. So just in case, at this time, he probably wasn't the most spring chicken. He wouldn't be moving around loads, so I don't really know what you'd have been watching other than just him sat in a chair and maybe shouting at some players. But yeah, this was a feature for viewers of TNT Sports. Sadly, just 1 year later from this win at Newell's Old Boys, the legend that is Maradona would sadly pass away while still in the job as manager at Gimnasia. And Argentina would come to a standstill as many made the pilgrimage to the capital to have a chance to visit his coffin that was placed in the presidential palace, the Casa Rosanda.
This this thing once again that we've said that it's come up multiple times now. Newell's look after their own. He only played 5 games. Yes, he was a legend, but still he got that sort of welcome when he came back, which is it's pretty amazing. I think that's the thing that's impressed me the most about Newell's so far is like this family kind of feel.
Once you're red and black, you're one with the team forever, with the ethos and this identity. None other than Diego himself, he said that the history of football is called Newell's Old Boys. When looking back at this podcast, these past 2 episodes, the places these managers and players have ended up and influenced the world of football, that is not a crazy statement from Maradona.
That's a nice thing, like we said, like these connections and everything, sort of all roads lead to Newell's Old Boys in a way. And it wouldn't be until 2013 where we would see these homecomings and Newell's connections all come together again, as Newell's would clinch a 6th national title, led by Gerardo Martino, who had actually had 3 spells at Newell's across the 80s and 90s. His team here was characterised with a playing style that was compared to Barcelona, which obviously we all know later on he would become the Barcelona manager and is also actually Messi's current manager at Inter Miami as well.
What was rather fitting about this 2013 title win was that it was based heavily on the return of many of, in inverted commas, the Newell's old boys, as the likes of Gabriel Heinze, Maxi Rodriguez and Ignacio Scocco had all returned to the club that they had started their careers at. Heinze began his career in Rosario before heading to Europe, playing for the likes of Sporting CP, Paris Saint-Germain, Manchester United, Real Madrid, Marseille and Roma before returning back to Newell's in 2012. Maxi Rodriguez was born in Rosario, battled through the youth ranks, playing in the top division for Newell's Old Boys, racking up 57 appearances before moving to Europe. He played for the likes of Espanyol, Atletico Madrid, achieved cult status at Liverpool, as I would say as a Liverpool fan, before then romantically returning back to his hometown club as well. And finally, Ignacio Scocco, he began his career at Newell's in 2003 before moving on in 2006, and he would play for Newell's again over 3 more separate spells. The most eye-catching time being the 2012-13 title win, where he would score 24 goals in 33 games.
I think it's such a fitting way that they've come back to be the spine of this team that finally wins the league title again, and almost harks back again to the team we started this episode with the 17 youth team players, and it's all been done in a stadium that's named after Bielsa. This is what I loved about Newell's going through it, and it just really makes me want to, I don't know, start a Football Manager save with not even Newell's first team, with the academy, and try and do a Bielsa for a year. And I just think it's amazing that all of these things come back and connect.
To maybe summarise, it feels like when you're starting your career with Newell's, it feels more like a lifelong love affair rather than just a simple stepping stone in your playing career. And this makes us want to see, in some capacity, best as a player, but in some capacity, Messi return to his roots and even maybe play some games in the famous red and black, or maybe as a manager in the future. That would be incredible as well. And perhaps if that day ever comes, Messi could be involved in the next Newell's national title win, which the club unfortunately has not repeated since that 2012-13 season.
That would be really cool. Or a Bielsa return would also be very interesting.
There's not many players, and I only think it's literally only Lionel Messi that could probably be able to pull out the red and black Diego Maradona throne and use it on the touchline.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. As long as Bielsa has a red and black bucket next to it. To sit on
So that's what we're going to call it for this romantic dive through the history of Newell's Old Boys, episode 9. It's been fantastic and absolutely loved it from the beginning all the way to the end here. It is just it's just a love affair. It's lovely to read. It's lovely to hear. And yeah, we'll be keeping out for their results going forward.
Yeah, it's just pure nerdy football filth and I loved it. And I am like an adopted Newell's fan after this, 100%. I guess that leads us into our cryptic link. Do you want to do that? Do the honours?
So as we leave Newell's Old Boys, our next club also once again got to experience the chaos and magic of Marcelo Bielsa. And, as we mentioned in part 1 of the episode, they hosted Newell's on their 1949 European tour. So let us know where you think we'll be heading to next. And apart from that, I think that's been it. We're the Journeymen podcast. Make sure to follow us on social media to keep up to date with our upcoming episodes, our ground hopping exploits, and also our giveaways in the future. Please let us know if you have any stories, any insight into any of the stories we've touched upon in this episode. At the end of the day, we're just two guys who love talking about football, and we love having any interaction, any insight from anyone who's better placed around the world and has come into contact with these stories. We love to hear them, we love to read them. And I think about that, I think that's where we're going to wrap things up here.
It's been a pleasure, and see you on the next one. I'm Mark.
I'm Joseph Corlett. Have a good one.